Hey everyone, welcome back to Bagel TCG. Today we're going to be finishing our set review series for Classic Constructed with UPRISING. I think I'm going to be combining the last two videos. I was going to do a separate video for the classes and for the generics, but I'm just going to kind of run through a longer form video today. I've got some extra time, so I'm just going to kind of pump this one out for you guys. We're going to be reviewing just the straight up ice cards, all three of the class only cards, for the different three classes, and then the generics in this set. Before we hop into that, I want to shout out our sponsor, Whipped and Wizard. You can use the affiliate link in the description to support the channel and get 5% off all box breaks. You can also support me on Patreon, where I have cool stuff like giveaways and bonus content. I put out an extra video after every YouTube video that's kind of longer form and more podcast style. But let's hop into the reviews here. Like always, 5-star scale here, just like all the other videos. Let's hop right into the reviews for the first card, Coronet Peak. This is our legendary ice equipment. It has 2 block and blade break, and you can pitch 3 resources to make your opponent discard a card or target hero discard a card unless they pay 1. This card's great. It can turn any of your blues into a blue Winter's Bite. It's been really helpful in Icelander. If you have a channel like Frigid out that you play from Arsenal on your opponent's turn, sometimes it can be kind of hard to keep that around because you don't pitch ice cards that much on your turn, so it's kind of an easy way to do that. If you have an awkward hand that doesn't do much, you can pitch a blue to blue Winter's Bite your opponent still. So I think this card is going to be basically the only headpiece Icelander runs. She's going to run it almost all the time. I don't think the other ice decks are going to want it because Oldhim already has Crown of Seeds and Lexi already has New Horizon. But I think this is going to be Icelander's main headpiece. So I'm going to give it 4 stars as a core headpiece for Icelander. Other decks, I mean, that's not unplayable in the other ice decks because it's still good, but it's just not, they have better options, right? Next, we've got the common ice equipment headpiece, Glacier Horns. You destroy it to freeze a card in Arsenal or an ally until your next turn. It has Go Again. Like most common pieces, they're for limited only. I think maybe freezing an ally or Arsenal can sometimes be good without having to pay anything, so I'll give it 2 stars. I don't actually think it's really playable, but I think it's a cute enough effect where maybe it could be niche. Next, we've got Channel the Bleak Expanse. This is our first Ice Majestic. It is a 1-cost blue non-attack action with Go Again that blocks for 2. It says heroes can't draw cards, reveal cards, or search decks from effects, and it has Channel Ice. This card I thought was going to be great, and I've so far only kind of liked it in Icelander and haven't liked it at all in the other 2 decks, the other 2 ice decks. The main problem is that it's symmetrical, so for Oldhim, you can't draw cards from Crown of Seeds because both heroes can't draw cards. For Lexi, you can't fuse any of your ice arrows because you can't reveal cards. It's best in Icelander because you can play it from Arsenal at instant speed. If your opponent plays like an Artivore or a 3 of a kind or a Sonata Arcanix, it can stop a lot of stuff. It does hurt you as well because you are still trying to fuse your ice cards, but you can always let it go at the end of your turn and just use it as kind of a one-time effect to stop your opponent. I think it's probably the best use of it for Icelander. Just kind of take off your next turn a little bit, maybe just throw like just activate your crown, right, and make your opponent discard a card. But I think the effect is solid in using it in response, but I just don't think it's worth it in the other 2 ice heroes. I do think it's playable in Icelander still, though, although it will hurt you sometimes. But because I think it's playable in Icelander still, I'm going to give it 3 stars for playable, probably not as playable in the other 2 ice heroes. Our next Ice Majestic here is Hypothermia. This card's pretty great, actually. Hypothermia is an affliction. It costs 0. It's blue. It's a non-attack action, and it blocks for 2. Those are all its stats. I guess I don't really need to read that out as much. You guys can see it all here. Just to keep it faster, I'll just kind of go over the effects. You guys can see the cards on screen here, unless you're listening to me full podcast style. But basically, this makes your opponent not have Go Again for a turn cycle, or I should say it makes their attacks unable to gain Go Again, right? So if they have effects like Head Jab that has Go Again written on the card, or Ravenous Rabble, it'll keep it. But this really hurts decks like Briar and the Rune Blades that mostly gain Go Again. I think Briar's only built-in go again is Ravenous Rabble, so it's gonna hurt her big time. This card's been really great. Removing their go again for a turn cycle has ended up being great, and being 0 cost is awesome. I think maybe all of the ice decks could play this, but I think almost certainly Icelander and Oldhim will be playing this. Lexi might not want to play it. It doesn't have go again, and it does slow her down a little. But this is really good sideboard card, or even mainboard card. I mean, it's still a blue ice card, so it still does all of the pitching and fusing that the ice decks want to do. This card's great, and it really just slaughters certain decks for a turn cycle and matchups. I mean, if the Briar goes Channel Mount Heroic and then you Hypothermia, their Channel Mount Heroic turn is going to be a lot worse unless they draw Ravenous Rabble. So because of that, 5 stars, amazing card, and especially great meta call in certain matchups. And then our last Majestic here, Insidious Chill, basically is 3 Frostfangs. So for the cost of 3 resources, it enters the arena with 3 Frost counters on it, and then each time you Ice Fuse, you remove a Frost counter, and then target hero discards a card unless they pay 2. So this card's been amazing. I wish it had go again, but obviously that might be too strong. But it is a 3-cost card. Basically lets you store 3 Frostfangs on it. I think it's really good in almost all the ice decks. I think Oldhim has the most trouble using this, obviously. He definitely Ice Fuses the least. So it might not be worth playing in Oldhim. I could definitely see Oldhim not wanting to play this. You'd have to start adding in stuff like Snow Under, Endless Winter, Biting Gale, and that's probably not worth it. But Ice Lexi fuses almost every turn. Icelander fuses almost every turn, or at least wants to. So this card's great in both of those decks. I think this is an amazing card. It gets you a ton of value. I mean, a Frostfang effect is worth almost 2 resources. This is equivalent to Frostfang effect is yellow Winter's Bite, basically, right? Which is a 0-cost card, but it's worth a whole card, right? So this is kind of storing 3 cards, maybe 2.5 cards worth of value on 1 card. So this card's phenomenal. It should be definitely in Lexi and Icelander for sure. And if we have any future Ice Heroes, I'm sure they might want this card as well. So 5 stars, amazing ice card, and definitely adds a lot of power and disruption to the ice decks. Next, we've got Eisenhower Weathervane. You can see I gave them all 4 stars because I really don't know which one's best. I think these are mostly just playable in Lexi, but they're just amazing in her, which is what they got this star rating for. Eisenhower Weathervane. The next time you Ice Fuse, your opponent gets either 2, 3, or 4 Frostbites. In Lexi, this is an amazing card. You flip it over in your arsenal. They get a Frostbite because of Lexi's ability. You play it, and then you play an Ice Arrow and fuse that Ice Arrow. So even just the blue gives your opponent 3 Frostbites between her ability and fusing. So this card's been amazing in Lexi. I don't think either of the other ice decks want this. Oldhim doesn't fuse enough, and Icelander can't really play 2 non-attacks a turn that consistently that both fuse. So I think this is mostly an Ice Lexi card, but it's really good in her. I think at first we were trying reds and blues, but the red was a little annoying that it only pitched for 1. So for now, we've been trying blues and yellows, like 3 of each of those, because still, I mean, 4 Frostbites is still a ton on the yellow. And giving your opponent 5 Frostbites on the red between Lexi ability and the effect, I mean, the difference between 4 and 5 Frostbites is not that huge. So I think this card's amazing in Ice Lexi. She really wants to see it as much as possible. It might be worth just playing all 9. It's just so strong to give your opponent a ton of Frostbites, kind of shut down their turn for 1 resource. This card's great. And yeah, 4 stars for all of them, just because I don't know exactly which one's best, but Ice Lexi is going to want this card for sure. Next, we've got Arctic Incarceration. This basically is just a 0-cost card that gives your opponent Frostbites. It doesn't have go again. It just gives them either 1, 2, or 3 Frostbites. It's a nice action that blocks for 2. I give the blue 4 stars because I think every Icelander is going to play it. I don't think any of the other ice decks are going to play it because they don't like the fact that it doesn't have go again. But for Icelander, if you play it from your arsenal on your opponent's turn at instant speed, they get 2 Frostbites because of her effect, which ends up being pretty strong. A 0-cost way to give your opponent 2 Frostbites is pretty solid. The other 2, not as playable because only Icelander really wants this card, and she can't play the non-blue ones to the same effect. I give the red one 2 stars just because a 0 for 3 Frostbite is kind of nice. But I think it's mostly just going to be the blue seeing play in every Iyslander deck. Next, we've got Cold Snap. Similarly, most ice decks want blues. Oldhim wants to pitch a blue for Winter's Wail. Iyslander wants to play a blue from Arsenal at instant speed. So the blue of this card is great. Freezing an Arsenal at instant speed is great for Iyslander, or just freezing an Arsenal in general is great. And for the only one resource and effectively no cards if you play it from your Arsenal, this is a really solid card, and I think Galaxxi will always be on Iyslander will always be on 3 of these. I don't know if the other ice decks are going to want to pick this card up, but I think Iyslander will certainly want 3 Cold Snap blues in her deck. All right, that's all the ice cards actually. Now we're going to move on to the class-only cards. First, we've got the Illusionist Equipment Ghostly Touch. So I have to say, this card has been weird. You probably read it and you think this is weird. Basically, every time you get a Phantasm pop, it gets a counter, and then you can pay 3 resources to attack with it, and it becomes an ally with base power and toughness equal the number of counters on it, -1, because you remove a counter to use it. So like if you have 6 Phantasms popped, and then you activate this, you're attacking with a 5/5 because you're moving a counter from it. And it's only until end of turn, so it's not like it's an ally that they can like kill on their turn, but it does have Phantasm itself, so they can still pop it, and then it's destroyed. It's really weird. I think it's too cute, maybe, at least so far from what I've been seeing. Like, to get real value out of it, your opponent has to pop, upwards of 5-6 cards, and you're probably already losing if your opponent has popped 5 or 6 cards. I mean, you're probably already in a bad spot, so I think for now I'm just going to give this 2 stars. It's maybe like a good sideboard card against like Brute and Guardian, who are going to be popping stuff anyways. But then they can just pop this as well. So unless you're using some cool effects like Passing Mirage or Semblance, Ghostly Touch is a little too cute. What's not cute is Silent Stilettos. It's just good because it has Arcane Barrier 1. You don't really need to read the rest of the text box. It's basically a one-time Phantasmal Footsteps, but for anything, so it works on allies you control too. But you pay 3 resources for it. So it's kind of a very expensive, common version of Phantasmal Footsteps. But guess what? It has Arcane Barrier 1, which means it's playable. Almost anything with Arcane Barrier 1 is playable. Just straight up Arcane Barrier 1 is playable in the form of Null Rune. So this card, there's nothing crazy going on here. It's just Arcane Barrier. So if your Illusionist wants some Arcane Barrier against those wizards, Silent Stilettos is a nice card for you. Next, we've got this crazy card, the first Illusionist Majestic here, Frightmare. It is a 3-cost red, it doesn't block, and it attacks for 13 for only 3 resources. But you have to have a card with Phantasm already destroyed this turn, and this has Phantasm. So I think this card's probably too cute as well. It doesn't block, it's a red, it costs 3. The only selling point here is that it attacks for 13, which is just a crazy high number. But it also has Phantasm, so your opponent can just pop it again. So there's not like a ton of value here. You have to like trick your opponent into using their only pop on your first card, and you have to know they only have 1 pop, or at least hope they only have 1 pop, and then swing with this. So not really sold on this card. Gonna give it 1 star for unplayable. I don't know where this sees play, but I'm sure some people are gonna make it work, and I'm gonna die to it, and I'm gonna be sad. But until then, I don't think the card's great. A better card is Semblance here, our next Illusionist Majestic. This is a blue 3-cost instant, so it doesn't block either, but that's because this one's an instant. It just says negate all Phantasm triggered effects of target an Illusionist attack you control. It loses and can't gain Phantasm. So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty nice. Like, this just removes Phantasm from one of your cards. I think the main problem is that it doesn't block, it's an instant, and it's a blue. This card is actually, I did just realize something. I'm going to double check this because that might make this card better. But let me pull the UPRISING release notes up actually on this card, because it doesn't say. Interesting. It doesn't say in the release notes either actually, so maybe someone can judge check me in the comments. But this doesn't say like gains it again at end of turn. So I'm curious if your allies, if you use this on an ally, if it permanently removes Phantasm from that ally. Because on attacks, obviously that attack goes away at the end of turn anyways, so it doesn't really matter. But I'm curious if you target an ally if that will stay permanently. It does say Illusionist attack, so maybe it's not forever because maybe the dragon only counts as Phantasm for that attack. But either way, I'm just going to assume for now that it's what I thought, and which means I thought it just was for that turn. Meaning this card's a little expensive for that effect. 3 resources is a lot, but the nice thing is it's a blue still, so there's not that much downside outside of the not blocking. I think this card might be a nice sideboard card into stuff like Brute and Guardian. They'll try to pop. You can activate this card or play this card in response to the pop, and then they've already given you a whole card and declared blocks, and you're probably going to get over with your attack. So this card can be really nice, and I like it a lot, but it is a 3-cost card that doesn't block, so 2 stars. It's going to go to 3 stars if it stays on dragons forever, or maybe 4 stars, because that's pretty insane. But assuming it's just for that turn, I think this card is maybe like a 2.5 star here, because I do think it's kind of nice against Brute and Guardian, but that's also kind of what the 2-star niche means anyways, is that it has a niche, you'll play it against Brute and Guardian, but it's not always playable in the deck like a 3-star card. Next here we've got Transmogrify. This is our Illusionist Rare Cycle. This card costs 1, it blocks for 2, and basically what it does is it turns your next attack action card into an Illusionist card, and it increases its base power by a lot, but it also gives it Phantasm, right? So this can be really cute, especially in like something like a Phoenix Flame. That is a 0-cost card with Go Again that attacks for basically 0. It turns this, like the red will turn your Phoenix Flame instead of a 0 for 0 with Go Again, turns it into a 0 for 8 with Go Again, for the cost of 1 resource on Transmogrify. But the problem is that it gives it Phantasm, which, I mean, is a fair downside for how strong these cards can be. But I just don't think it's worth it. I don't think these are going to see a ton of play. And because it doesn't work on your Dragon allies, and Prism doesn't really want this, there would have to be some combination of like a kind of Dromai Phoenix Flame deck to make this good. I'll give the blue 2 stars just because it is a blue. Alright, let's move on to the ninja cards. We've got the legendary arms here. This is Tiger Stripe Shuko. So Tiger Stripe Shuko is a 2-block blade break, right? But it has this awesome effect. So basically your second attack action card with 2 or less base power each turn has +1 in this damage. Damage that would be dealt by this can't be prevented. So it's really nice, especially with Phoenix Flames. Your first Phoenix Flame comes in for 1 like normal, but now the second one will come in for 2. So you can pretty consistently in FI get this to trigger every turn if you're just playing 2 Phoenix Flames every turn, which is not that hard for FI to do. So really, really good in FI. Basically 1 point of free value every single turn. The only reason I would see FI not playing this card is if it ends up being even better to play Stubby Hammers or Stubby Hammerers and do a combo with that. But assuming that the combo with that doesn't end up working out as the best version, this is certainly an amazing card for FI. An amazing card for Benji as well. Probably not as good in Ira or Katsu because they're not doing that many tiny attacks, but it's not horrible in them either. Just the fact that it's a 2-block is pretty nice. So I think this card's amazing. It's going to help Ninja out a lot and deal some extra damage every turn. It's basically Ira ability on your Phoenix Flames, which is pretty insane. So 4 stars, very core, very important to a lot of Ninja decks going forward. And this one I'm not going to spend too much time on either, just because it is just like Silent Stilettos. It has Arcane Barrier 1, so that's pretty nice. Arcane Barrier 1 is great. The effect is nice. It's kind of like a bad Snapdragon Scalers, but it has Arcane Barrier 1, so 3 stars for playable. Next we have Double Strike here. Double Strike is a 0 for 1 with Go Again. It's a red card, but the main thing is that when it resolves, you banish it, and you can play it again this combat chain. So basically, you get to play this card twice in 1 turn. You're double striking, right? But it can be nice with cards like Tiger Stripe Shuko, the arm piece. The second one of this will be +1 because of Tiger Stripe Shuko. It helps extend chain links if you're a deck that cares about having really big chain links. And it's just a lot of nice value. I mean, extending chain links makes Mask of Momentum more likely to trigger. And it does a lot of nice stuff. The main problem is that Fi really only wants Draconic chain links, so I don't see Fi using this. I think Benji will love this card, but I think Katsu maybe doesn't care as much about it. So I think this card's 3 stars. It is a strong card. It is playable, but I don't know exactly where it fits in right now. Our next card is Take the Tempo here. This card, if you've hit 3 times this turn, you can banish the top card of your deck. If it's an attack action card, you can play it until the end of your next turn. So it's kind of a card draw, basically, if the top card of your deck is an attack action card. But there's a few problems with this card. One, you have to hit 3 times in a single turn. So against any deck that's blocking you, that's not super likely. 2, you can miss if it's not an attack action card, if it's a reaction or a non-attack action. And, I mean, those are the 2 main problems, actually. There's not really a third problem. I mean, I guess this also has to hit what I would say is the third problem. So you have to hit 3 times this combat chain, and this has to hit. Although maybe it counts itself, actually, which makes it a bit better. But either way, 3 stars because it's a 1 for 5 with 3 blocks. So there's everything good on the stats there. But the only reason it's not any better is because it is going to be a little hard to make this trigger. I think this will be nice against other aggro decks where it's going to be easier to make it hit, so I'll give it 3 stars for that. But you might want to side this out against some more controlling decks. Let's look at the rares here. We've got Rapid Reflex. Rapid Reflex costs 1, and it gives an attack action card that costs 0, either +1, 2, or 3. I'm going to give the blue 3 stars here because it is a blue. And a lot of the ninja decks like playing blue attack reactions because if you don't need them, you pitch them. If you do need them, they're in your hand still to get that extra 1 damage over and trigger mask momentum or any of your on-hit triggers. I do think lunging press is mostly better, and we're already probably playing that. Lunging press costs 0, so it costs less resources, and it targets anything for +1. The only upside this card gives is that it is a 3 block. So maybe if you're a more controlling ninja, you like the 3 block of this card more. But for the most part, I don't think this card is crazy playable. 1 cost for +3 on the red is just kind of worse Razor Reflex most of the time. It's interesting. It's nice that it blocks 3 at least. All right, onto the wizard cards. We've got Waning Moon. I think I've talked about this card before in the last video just because I needed to in terms of the context of Sigil of Permafrost. But that context is still important. This card's amazing with Sigil of Permafrost, but also just amazing in general. 3 arcane damage on your opponent's turn for 2 resources is a really good rate. And all you have to do is play a non-attack on their turn. This card is amazing in Icelander. It's almost definitely the weapon she wants in most matchups for sure. There might be some matchups where you choose Kraken's Aethervane, but I think typically you're going to want Waning Moon here. I don't think, obviously, Kano's going to want this as much because he really likes his Crucible weapon for his combo turns. But for a more burn mid-range wizard who just wants to slowly burn down their opponent instead of comboing, they're going to love the 3 damage consistently from Waning Moon. And you can still do 2 on your turn if you play a non-attack action. So really amazing weapon. Give it 5 stars. People are going to have to start packing some AB3 if they don't want to die to Waning Moon. The legendary is Eluvian Constellas, a really cool chess piece with AB1. So AB1, you know me, that's already a 3-star rating minimum because it has AB1. And basically, every time you prevent damage with it, it gets an energy counter. And you can remove 2 energy counters to make your next staff activation 3 less. So you get a free weapon activation. And it can actually store up to 4 counters on it. So you can store 2 staff activations on it, which is pretty nice. So AB1, the effect is like totally fine. It's nice value. But you're only going to play this in matchups where you can AB1 anyways, because otherwise the effect doesn't matter. So 3 stars, very playable. You're definitely going to put this in the deck against arcane decks, but it's not core by any means. I mean, you're not going to be against an arcane damage deck the whole game anyways. So 3 stars. And then the common version is Spellfire Cloak. Also has AB1, and then has that instant ability to destroy it and gain a resource during an opponent's turn. Usually, I think I say 3 stars to all the AB1. You'll be surprised that this one has a 1-star for unplayable, unlike the other AB1 cards. But that, my friends, is because we have a legendary version of this that is much better. The other versions, we don't have legendary AB1 Ninja Boots or legendary AB1 Illusionist Boots. So obviously, AB1 is nice and is usually playable, but we just have a more playable version of this card. Our first Wizard Majestic here, Tome of Duplicity. It costs 3. It's a blue. Basically, you look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You can banish one. If it's non-attack, you can play it this turn as though we're an instant. I don't know what the heck this card does. Wizard confuses me. I think Kano can banish it off the top and get another non-attack, basically. But that sounds really resource insensitive for 3 resources. I'm sure there's some sort of really cool Kano combo that uses this. I think this is way too resource intensive for Icelander to use, but maybe the Kano players out there will break this card. Just because I'm scared of the Kano players breaking this card, I'm going to give it 2 stars. But for now, I don't really see the appeal of this. Next, we've got Rewind. I think this card is really interesting. For only 1 resource, you get to negate a non-attack and return it to your opponent's hand, right? They gain an action point, but that's only because you're negating the card, basically. So if it didn't give them an action point, it would just end their turn, which is a little unfair. So they're just getting the action point back that they spent on that non-attack action. It's not like they're going to have 2 action points here. But this can be really good. I mean, if your opponent pitches a blue earth card for Channel Mount Heroic and then you negate it for only 1 resource, they would have to, I mean, they still uses the resources is the main advantage of this card. So they would have to pitch another earth card that's a blue to play Channel Mount Heroic again. And the odds they have that in hand is pretty low, so they might just have to arsenal that channel and go next turn. And then they already committed 3 resources to it. So this is a sideboard card that is very good against decks that spend a lot of resources or a lot of costs on non-attack actions. So it's decks that want to spend 3 or 4 or even more resources on a non-attack action. Against Jamai, you can negate a big expensive dragon, and they already have sacrificed the Ash. I assume the Ash goes away too. So really nice that this card can just mess with big non-attack actions. I love it in those matchups. Outside of that, though, it's pretty much sideboard only if they're not playing expensive. If they're only playing a 1, I mean, if you negate a Nimblism, it doesn't actually do anything because they can just play the Nimblism again and it didn't cost them any resources. So it is only good against expensive non-attacks where you want them to commit the cost of that card already. But I think it's 3 stars for playable. I think I'm a little worried that it doesn't block, but I think it can be really powerful against some of these decks that have expensive non-attack actions. Let's look at our rares here. We've got Dampen. It deals 2, 3, or 4 arcane damage to any target, and then you prevent the next arcane damage where X is the damage dealt by a Dampen. So I don't know where this card works. I guess if you're doing a bunch of wizard 1v1s, this card is kind of cool, but I just don't think it's worth a slot in your deck unless wizard becomes insanely powerful. But maybe against some like Rune Blades, I think the effect carries over. So if you deal some arcane damage and they shoot you with 4 different little rune chants, I think it prevents all 4 of those. So if we see like Viscerai pop back up, I might increase the score of some of these Dampens here. But I think in general, there is better wizard attack actions to play. The blue gets a 3-star rating because it's hard for me not to give a blue 3 block a 3-star rating. But like I said, maybe against if Runeblade or Wizard starts getting really, really popular, that does a lot of arcane damage, maybe they'll play this, but until that point, I don't think this card is crazy playable. Aether Dart is basically Zap that can hit allies. It's literally Zap, actually, that can hit allies. So it deals 1, 2, or 3 arcane damage. It costs 0, just like Zap, but this one can hit any target and not just allies. I basically gave the blue 3 stars because it's a blue 3 block once again, and the red surprisingly gets 3 stars because Wizard struggles a lot against the Dragon Thamai, the 3/4 that makes it so you cannot play anything on your opponent's turn. But with Crucible of Aether and Aether Dart, you can deal 4 damage to Thamai. So Kano is definitely going to want some Aether Darts in that deck to kill Thamai on their turn using Crucible and Aether Dart there. So pretty cool way for Kano to kill Jamai, or kill Thamai on Jamai. It's going to be kind of confusing with all of the I's and E's and A's that Jamai has. Then we got Read the Ripples with this absolutely terrifying art here, actually. This card's kind of interesting. It's a 0-cost card that doesn't actually cost anything because you draw a card at the beginning of your end phase when it destroys itself. You also opt 1, either 1, 2, or 3 times. So maybe Kano will like the red here or the blue here just to get some opt-in that doesn't cost him any cards. I could see the red being interesting to opt 1 3 times on Kano. Obviously, Opt 1 isn't as good as Opt 3, because if you like the card on top, you don't get to see the 2 under it. You're just going to keep opting that card on top. So maybe that's why it's not as good. Maybe then you pick the blue, because then you're just getting Opt 1 no matter what, and you still replace itself. And the biggest downside, though, is that it's a 2 block, which is why these cards don't have higher than a 2-star rating. Then we've got Singe. This card basically just exists to kill Aether Ashwings. That's why the red has 3 stars, because it can kill 3 Aether Ashwings. So yeah, this card's nice. It gets pumped by any of your pump effects if you need to kill bigger dragons, but mostly it's nice to kill Aether Ashwings, which is why the red gets a playable rating. Let's move on to generics here with a very talked about card, Crown of Providence. This is another legendary equipment headpiece that's in the generic slot, so competing with Arcanite Skullcap basically means it has to be better than Arcanite Skullcap for decks that want to choose between the two. But I think it is in a lot of scenarios. So it's 2 block with Blade Break, so this one blocks for 2 and then destroys itself, which is different than Skullcap, which can block for basically 3 total, because it blocks for 2 and then 1 if you're using it properly. But this one blocks for 2 from the get-go, right? Skullcap, you have to be at less health than your opponent to block for 2. This one will always block for 2, which makes it a lot nicer in aggressive decks that are trying to get their opponent dead. If you're an aggro deck and your opponent's usually at less life than you anyways, you're not really going to get as much value from Skullcap. This one also has a cool effect, so when you defend with it, you can either put a card from your hand or arsenal on the bottom of your deck if you do draw a card. So it can also, when you block with it, it makes your next turn better, basically, because you can take one of the 5 cards in your hand or arsenal, 5 total options, right? And you can put on the bottom and draw a card. So you're just fixing your next turn to be even better. This card's amazing. I think almost every Skullcap deck is going to want this instead of Skullcap. There might be a few exceptions if you're a control deck. Skullcap is maybe still better because it blocks for 1 more. But I think most decks that aren't control decks, especially like aggro decks like Briar, definitely wants this card over Skullcap. You're just going to love that hand filtering. If you're a Briar deck and you have 4 non-attack actions in hand, Crown of Providence might just get you out of that. So really powerful effect here on a 2 block. That is a 2 block from the get-go. You could probably guess by now, 5 stars, kind of the new premier legendary headpiece in the generic slot. Skullcap, still totally fine, still also probably a 5-star card, but Crown of Providence is just amazing. Next we've got Helios, either Meyer or Mitre, but I'm going to go with Meyer. I don't know which one it is, but this is basically just for draft. You can always add this into your limited draft pool, so basically every limited deck is going to have this in sealed and draft. It doesn't really do much in TC. It's a very, 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 very expensive Arcane Barrier / Quell, but it's not great. It's going to get 1 star. Don't worry about this card. You're not going to really see it. If you do see it, you shouldn't be worried about it anyways. I don't think that's everything. Maybe I had 2 Helios Meyer in there. Next, we've got the Quell common cards. Quell, basically, you pay 1 to prevent 1 damage if you would be dealt damage, right? If you would destroy it at the beginning of the end phase. So if you're getting attacked for 4, you can pay 1 and only take 3 damage. But you can do that as much as you want that turn. So if you're hit for 1, 1, and 1 on different sources, you can pay 1 each time. It's pretty nice against like go wide decks like Ninja and stuff that are trying to do a bunch of smaller attacks. This can block fully 2 Kodachis for 2 resources. But it's not really worth it. The card doesn't do anything else. These are also mostly limited. So 1 star for the robe, 1 star for the arms, and 1 star for the legs. They're all going to be very, very strong and limited, and you should definitely pick them up in your draft for sealed, but I don't think you should worry too much about them in Classic Constructed. Now let's move on to the next Command and Conquer here. This is basically a balanced version of Command and Conquer. Command and Conquer, as we know, not only blocks for 3, but also turns off defense reactions, so a little too much value for only 2 resources. But this card still has an amazing effect. It is a 2 for 6, but it only blocks for 2, and it doesn't have that amazing defense reaction line. But if it hits a hero, cards and tokens they own lose all class and talent types until the end of your next turn. So this is just an amazing sideboard card against certain heroes. 5, for example, cares so much about Draconic Chainlinks. Now, none of his Chainlinks are Draconic. Galaxxi wants to Ice Fuse every turn. Now she doesn't have ice cards. So many decks that are talented or class-based. Rhinar can't Blood Rush Bellows because he doesn't have brute attacks. It just deletes anything that says the word that has the class or talent on it is deleted. Even to a lesser effect. I mean, Oldhim, it doesn't hurt him as bad, right? But now his Winter's Wail can't be dealing frostbites because he can't pitch ice cards because ice cards don't exist for a turn for him. So this card can do a lot in a lot of different matchups, especially against fuse decks that care a lot about their cards being in their class, decks that care a lot about their cards being in their talent. This card's amazing. There's going to be some decks where you care less about it, right? For example, like Dorinthia. I'm trying to think of if she has any cards that say the word warrior on them. She probably has a few, but Dorinthia cares way less about class, and she doesn't have a talent. So there's going to be some decks where you take this out against because it's not going to do anything or do very little. But there's going to be some decks where when you erase face and then you throw that pummel on top of your erase face, Phi is going to be in for a very, very bad time. So this is going to be a major haymaker. The next Command and Conquer, right? Obviously not as insanely broken as Command and Conquer, not blocking for 3 or turning off defense reactions, but still being a great 2 for 6 with a really, really relevant on hit. So 5 stars. Decks are going to have to know erase face exists, and if you're a deck that cares about fusing or your class or your talent, you're going to need to respect erase face. On the other hand, we've got this very bad generic attack action. We've got Vipox here. It costs 0, it blocks for 3, it's a red, and it attacks for 1 whole damage. When it hits a hero, they lose life equal to the number of cards in their hand. So at most, it's a 0 for 5, basically, right? Unless you make them draw cards or they're drawing a bunch of extra cards. But assuming they have a 4-card hand, at most, this deals 5 damage from 0 resources without Go Again. So even at that point, I would rather just have a 0 for 4 Go Again, right? The only deck that this is currently even interesting in is Benji that can make it unblockable. So on Benji, you could play this and then like Snapdragons it for like a free 5 damage, which is really cool. And I think Benji might play 1 Vitbox because of that. But I think for 95% of decks in the format, this card is basically unplayable. Now we have one of our first Majestic defense reactions. I mean, we technically have like Pulse of Eisenloft before this. I think this might be our first generic Majestic defense reaction. It's called That All You Got. I kind of hate the name because it's so long. So my team's just been doing TAYG because the name is so long to type out. But this card's great. It's very sideboard because it doesn't do any, like in certain matchups, like against Brute, they're not going to come at you with any attacks that deal 2 or less damage. But against some decks, like Ninja, for example, this card's amazing. I mean, it blocks one of their cards. It breaks their Mask of Momentum chain link, so they're not going to be drawing a card, and you get to draw a card. So it's really good into Ninja. It's even fine into Runeblade. It can block Rosetta Thorn and draw you a card. So I kind of think of it as like if this is blocking a 2 damage attack, it's basically playing a card that says gain 2 life, draw a card, which is pretty phenomenal. And I think every single deck in the game would play a full 3 copies of gain 2 life, draw a card, because it's just so free. This card is especially good though in like actually aggro mirrors against other decks that are doing small attacks, right? If I'm on Briar and I'm against a Briar and I block their Rosetta Thorn with my That All You Got, I'm drawing a card. They did 2 less damage, and I still have a 4-card hand. So it can be really good in the aggro mirrors. It basically gains you 6 life without using any cards to do so. So I think this card's great. It's very situational. Like I said, against Guardian and Brute, this card does absolutely nothing outside of block for 3. But that's kind of still fine, right? If you have to play it, you still will. It's still a 0. It's still a block 3, right? Which most cards do anyways. And it's yellow, which is kind of nice. But 5 stars. This card is very, very backbreaking against certain decks. Like Ninja does not want to see their opponent resolve at That All You Got in an aggro race. And then I think our last generic Majestic is Fogdown. This is also a yellow, but it's 3 costs for this non-attack, and it makes non-attack actions lose and be unable to gain Go Again, and then at the beginning of your action phase, you destroy it. So for your opponent's full turn, their non-attacks lose and can't gain Go Again. It's really situational. Obviously, Runeblades don't love this card, but it's 3 full resources for it, and like you're committing a lot to this card. You're committing 2 cards, right? Basically, because you have to pitch a blue and you have to play this. So you're putting 2 cards into just turning off your opponent's non-attacks, which sometimes won't even do that much. I mean, a lot of decks don't care that much about this, so I don't think it's worth being in the 80 cards. I think maybe it's slightly playable. It's kind of fine, but I don't think it's going to be enough to win you any of those games against Runeblade. So I'm going to give this 2 stars. It's niche. It's kind of cool, but I don't think it's insane. Now onto our cycles. We got our rare here with Flex. I don't think the blue or the yellow is very playable of this card at all, but the red is kind of nice because you can use it if you've got extra resources to be a 0 or be a 2 for 6, right? Which is a great rate. A 0 for 4 is also a great rate. So it's a really solid rate on the red, and on your opponent, if you need to pop a Phantasm with it, you can also pop a Phantasm with it using 2 resources. So I think the red is pretty flexible here, and I could totally see redflex seeing play. So I'm going to give it a 3 for playable. I don't really see the blue or the yellow seeing play. Fyendal's Fighting Spirit here. This card is interesting. I don't see it seeing play in any deck. I don't know what deck wants this card. The only reason I gave the yellow 2 stars is because it does pop Phantasm and gain you a life if you're at less life than your opponent. So it's kind of nice to pop a Phantasm and gain a life, but I think there's just other cards that pop Phantasm that you'd rather have, right? Like I'd rather have 3 Command and Conquer and 3 Erase Face in my deck than any copies of Fyendal's Fighting Spirit. So I don't think any of these are going to really see play in Classic Constructed. Card that probably will see play in Classic Constructed, though, is Sift. You don't really care that much about the color strip, so you don't want the red or the yellow, because the effect is basically equally as good in all of them. You play it, you put 2 cards from your hand on the bottom of your deck, then draw that many cards for the blue. It's up to 2, so you don't have to choose 2. And it has Go Again. So mostly this is good in Briar, which is why the blue gets 3 stars for playable. First of all, it's a 3 block, so especially with the Embodiment of Earth, Briar turns this into a 1-card 4 block, which is pretty nice. But Briar also has a lot of problems with drawing too many non-attacks or too many attacks, and Sift basically can fix those hands and give you half of an Embodiment of Lightning. So I don't know what other decks would play this card, but I think Briar is going to want like at least 2 copies of Blue Sift. So for that reason, Blue Sift gets 3 stars. Next, we've got Strategic Planning. I have no idea what this card is supposed to be useful in. It basically, for the cost of no cards, lets you put a card with either cost 0, 1, or 2 from your graveyard on the bottom of your deck. But, I mean, it costs 1. You don't draw the card until your end phase, so you can only Arsenal it. I think you draw it before you draw your other cards, so you can Arsenal that card, but, like, you don't even know if it's going to be a good card that you want to Arsenal. And so I'm just unsure about this card. I don't know what deck would want this or when they would want it. I think you'd probably rather just play Remembrance, so 1 star for all of these. Brother in Arms is kind of nice. I don't think the blue or the yellow is playable, but the red is a 2 for 6, and it says when you defend with it, you can pay 1 resource. If you do, it gains +2 defense. It has 2 defense naturally. You can't see that on the screen because my beautiful face is covering it. But for 1 resource, you can turn this into a 4 block, which is kind of cool. Off of like a tunic counter, you can block for 4, which is nice. I don't think it's going to see a ton of play, so I just gave it niche, but the ability for it to be a 4 block on 1 card is kind of nice. Next, we got Critical Strike here. This card has no text. It is just a continuation of the cycle of cards that are textless and block for 3 and hit for a set amount. You're not going to see these being played in Classic Constructed. Trade-In, though, is a pretty cute card, especially in Rhinar. I like the red a lot. The red comes in for 3 with Go Again if you play it from Arsenal. Then you can discard a card and draw a card. The best part is you can choose what card you discard, right? So you're coming in with the red from your Arsenal, 3 Go Again. You choose to discard Beast Within. Not only do you draw a card off of Trade-In, you also get to do the Beast Within effect to draw a card, and you get to Intimidate from Rhinar. I don't know what other deck would want Trade-In, but I think Rhinar is likely going to want 3 red Trade-In. I think the blue and yellow are okay. The effect still isn't bad, but it just doesn't do as much damage, right? Like I tried out the blue and Rhinar, and 1 damage is just not worth a card. Meanwhile, 3 damage with Go Again is still gonna, put a decent chunk on your opponent. They still have to commit a full card to blocking it, and you get the Intimidate, and you get the card effect, and you can turn on Mandible Claws with it. I mean, worst case scenario, you play Trade-In. you just guard a card, you draw a card, you intimidate, and you pitch a blue and use Tunic Resource to come in with 2 claws, right? So with a 1 card hand, right, you can have Tunic Resource, 1 card in hand that's a 6 attack, and trade in your arsenal, and then you play red trade in, discard that card, get a blue, and then you can swing twice with claws. So that's like a 2 card 9 damage turn, which is still pretty nice. So red trade in, pretty solid card here. Healing Balm is kind of bad Sigil of Solace. The upside is that it is not an instant and it blocks for 2, but it doesn't have much else going for it. I don't really see these seeing play. The red is kind of nice because it's a 0 for 3 life, but I think you probably would rather have Sigil of Solace. I don't think Sigil of Protection is good either. It's going to be great in limited, but the fact that this just throws its whole body in front of the first damage you would take, maybe it'd be fine if it costs 0, but the fact that it only lasts for 1 turn cycle, it's asking a lot to make this work. I'm sure you could sometimes find value out of it, and you'll be very happy for your 1 for 4 red, but honestly, I'd probably rather just play Sink Below. So yeah, don't love Sigil of Protection. I don't see it seeing play either. I do like Oasis Respite. Yes, Respite though. Respite. Oasis Respite. Sorry, I just got to make sure I'm saying that one right. But Oasis Respite here is a 1 for 2, 3, or 4. It's an instant, and it prevents the next amount of damage that would be dealt to your hero this turn by a source of your choice. Actually, target hero, so even better for your ultimate pit fight fans out there. And if they have less life than each other hero, they gain 1 life. So the red's nice, right? If your opponent's coming in with the Winter's Wail, you can use a Tunic counter to block all of it, and you gain a life if you're at less life than them. But it does so much more, right? Not only does it do that, it blocks arcane damage, so it's great against Wizard. It gets around Dominate because it's an instant, and it can gain you life. So if you're gaining life and blocking the full 4 damage, the red is essentially a 1 for 5, which is a pretty solid rate, totally a playable rate. And I think the red is going to see a ton of play in a lot of decks. I really like the red, especially in Tunic-based decks that can use their Tunic counter to get a ton of value from Oasis Respite. But I don't obviously see the others seeing play as much in the same way that blue and yellow Sink Below don't see as much play. But yeah, that's everything. Like I said, this video is going to be a lot longer because I went through, I think, like 50 slides of cards here. So we're hitting like 48 minutes now. Really long amount of time, 47 minutes here. I appreciate if you made it all the way through the video. I don't blame you if you didn't make it all the way through the video. I tried to take it a bit slower this time too. I recorded this one once already and I talked way too fast and I felt like I was just rushing through the video. So I just wanted to take it a bit slower, talk through all the cards here. I think this set's really cool. I think it's going to have a pretty solid impact on Classic Constructed, especially some of the really cool generic Majestics here. Like if we look at some of these cool generic Majestics, let's go back to this one. That All You Got, really nice generic Majestic, and Erase Face, really nice generic Majestic, and the generic legendary Crown of Providence, I think. Yes, all 3 of those are really good generic cards, which are going to have an impact on a lot of decks. So I think this set's going to be pretty impactful. It's pretty nice. Even more impactful, though, obviously, is the Living Legend of Chain and Starvo. Almost definitely the 2 strongest decks the game has ever seen, and I think probably going to be the strongest for a while. I don't currently see any deck in the meta that I think is as strong as either of those decks were. So excited for maybe a slightly lower power level meta. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Let me know if you liked these reviews. Please give me any feedback. This is my first time doing a full Classic Constructed set review, I think. So for the next set, let me know anything you think I should do differently. If maybe you don't like this longer video, you liked the shorter ones I did, breaking it down more. If I should break it down more, if I should do anything different, I definitely appreciate it. If I should just get rid of my video camera because it blocks the 5 on the right card, tell me that. But yeah, I appreciate you guys for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you next time.